Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Inside Scoop. If you're not familiar with the Inside Scoop, it's a podcast dedicated to helping parents learn about the soccer pathways that would be available to their child if they lived in another city around the world. And my name is Neil Crawford. I'm your host and also the founder of Anytime Soccer Training. But in addition to that, in addition to learning about soccer around the world, now we have pivoted to learning about interesting folks making a change in youth soccer right here in the States. I'm coming from Cary, North Carolina, and my guest here is Kaig Lightner. Kaig, you have the most interesting name in the world. Hopefully, you're the most interesting person in the world. Kaig is the founder of Portland Community Football Club. And Kaig, I want you to introduce yourself, tell us about your club, and then we're going to get started with the show. And this show's topic is about bending the cost curve of soccer here in the States. Let's go. Kaig, welcome to the
Love
show.
it. Thanks, Neil. It's great to be here. Kaig Lightner. I am here in Portland, Oregon, and I have been playing soccer and all sorts of sports since I was a young kid. I am a transgender person, so I grew up playing sports, being seen as a girl, being told a whole lot of things about how girls should or shouldn't play, where my place was. But it was also sports was my refuge. It was the place that I found myself and all of my identity. So I've been involved in sports and been an athlete since as far back as I can remember. I've been coaching since I was 15. That's well over 25 years of coaching. And I've also been working in the field of social work for almost 15 years. And so I just am somebody who loves to be around people, around kids and sports. And that's partly why I started Portland Community Football Club, was to get soccer to the kids and the families in the communities that are getting left out of this big pay-to-play system, because it's so expensive, it's so exclusive, it's got so many barriers built into it, and this game is so accessible at its root, right? You get out on a field, on a court, on a piece of pavement, on a dirt path. I don't care where you are. You throw down a ball, you can play soccer. It just happens. But here in the US, it's so much more difficult than that. And I'm a problem solver. I'm somebody who wants to find solutions to things. And so I just saw that there was an issue and I wanted to be a part of making a change in that issue. And so 10 years ago, I started Portland Community Football Club with the idea of the communities that are getting left out. They are the center of our club. They are not the afterthought. They are not the next thought. They are the center. They are the first thought of what do those communities need to access this sport. And we can get into all the details on that, but that's the nutshell of me.
Thanks for that. So in terms of the blocking and tackling, when was the organization founded?
Yeah, 2013 is when we started. And we started out with free soccer going out to the parks. That's what we did in the summer, and that's how we found all of our kids.
Man, that sounds like a movie. You got a movie in you. And then what size, for our listeners, what size is the club now?
We're at around 235 kids that have registered this year, and we play all year round. So we've got kids that play with us all 12 months out of the year, some kids that leave and go and play another sport and come back, but we're at about 235, and we've got about 10 to 15 coaches. They kind of come and go as well.
Okay, so let me start here. So my background is in finance, many of the listeners know, and I bring that perspective to trying to understand the pay-to-play system.
Yeah.
And I actually did a podcast very recently where I said, or at least I argued, while there are always going to be some bad actors in this space, I think most people are in the nonprofit and youth soccer space, and I got to use my air quotes for nonprofit, because they believe in the mission and they want to help kids. And it's all of these other things around them that begin to happen, and all of these other forces beyond our control that lead to the decisions and the choices that are being made and what you see. And so as I try to unpeel the onion here and start thinking about how did we get to this point? How did we get to this point? I want you to give your perspective on how did we go from what I remembered in Parks and Rec, or you play 8 games of this, and your parents drop you off and they pay their $20 or whatever, and Uncle Bobby is coaching. How did we go from that to where we at now?
Yeah. It's a complex answer, and also I'll give my best understanding of how it's happened, and I've done quite a bit of reading on it and still trying to really unpack it. The simplest thing is, part of it is an underfunding or a defunding of those recreational programs. That over the years, there's been less and less resources and funding going into keeping Parks and Recs programs running or running at the level that they can really provide a good experience for kids. There's still park and rec programs that do exist, but are kids getting a good quality experience there? What's the coaching like? What are they really getting as a result of being able to play there? And so I think you have less and less funding in those programs, less and less funding for community-based programs, and therefore you get less of a quality experience for the kids to be able to really enjoy it and really have a good time, especially if they want to play at a higher level. And so maybe it'll work, okay, for a 5 and 6 year old, they're just getting started. But what happens when that kid is 7, 8, 9 years old and they decide, hey, I want to play this, on a higher level. I want to really be challenged. I want to really learn this sport beyond just kind of kicking it around. Where's the options there? That's where it really starts to fall flat. And then we see kids leaving those programs. And so what's happened over the course of time, over the many, many decades, actually last 3-4 decades of there being less and less funding of these programs, is that what's filled in the space are these clubs, and the ability for a club to come in and say, we've got the coaching, we've got the environment, we've got the place for kids to come and play. Oh, but you got to pay, right? It's not being funded by any other source than the families that are funding it, than the income level of the families. So that's part of the nuts and bolts of what's happened, and it's taken quite a while. It's not just been an overnight thing, and so it's been difficult, I think, for people to recognize that it's a problem. It's just sort of been this evolution of youth soccer that has turned into this pay-to-play system, and now it's bled into the high schools, and now it's more difficult to make your high school team if you haven't played club soccer. And so and then go beyond that to, well, I want to go play in college. Well, you got to make your high school varsity team. Well, how do I make my high school varsity team? Well, you got to play club soccer. Well, when should I start playing club soccer? When you're 8, because you got to start specializing now. So it just starts backfilling into, I think, a pressure point for parents who can afford it to say, well, I guess this is my option. I guess this is it for my kid to go and play it at a level that they want to play at. And then for the parents who can't afford it, who aren't capable of having that income level, what's the option for those parents, right? It's just that rec program, or it's nothing, or it's just going to kick the ball around, which actually has a lot of benefit to it, but not when we're talking about this larger system that's got all this pressure built into it.
Yes. So oftentimes in the blogosphere space, the social media space, you'll hear the parents' desire to offer their kids a quality soccer program. You'll hear it characterized as parents are crazy and they think their kid is going to be the next Messi. Mm-hmm. And I often argue, actually, parents are very vulnerable when they start. They don't know. Yeah. They would be more. That's even if they're interested. My wife, like I always use my wife as an example. She's not even that bothered by it, assuming they are interested in it.
Yeah.
And they look to the industry practitioners for guidance. And the guidance that is provided is the chicken and egg situation where you either get in now or you're going to be behind. Mm-hmm. The guidance that is provided is we're only focused on development. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. Which then that has connotations of these other people are not. If you want to develop, you have to do this. The guidance that's provided is if your 8-year-old is not playing against the best 8-year-olds in the city, they're going to fall behind. And there's this all natural anxiety that that comes along with it, just being a parent trying to figure this out. So then what does that mean? That leads to a demand side issue as well. So even if you, and we'll talk about this with your organization, even if you create an organization and says, listen, we're going to offer some free training for kids. I don't care what the quality is, that price signal, you're going to struggle just convincing people that it's quality.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's some of that. And I do think that our club programs are now responding to this demand.
Mm-hmm.
Now to my next question, though, to this. You've identified that recreational program resources are being depleted. Then the customer base that would be supporting those programs in terms of volunteers as well as money are leaving to the club programs. How is your organization addressing this particular issue of offering quality at a lower price point?
Yeah, we have really set out to find the coaches that are within our communities within Portland that also are reflective of the communities that we're serving. So more coaches of color, more women, more LGBTQ coaches. We've really set out to find those coaches who are knowledgeable about the game. They don't have to have a high level of coaching experience coming in, but they need to know the game. They need to have played it at least through high school, if beyond is even better. Oftentimes it's most of our coaches are still currently playing as adults. And by setting that as the baseline for a volunteer or a low stipend paying coach, we're automatically bringing a level of expertise to the kids from the player's perspective that I think often is left out when looking at all volunteer coaching programs that often happen in the rec programs. That's when volunteer parents come in, like your example of like, oh yeah, Uncle Bobby, Auntie Betty, she's coming in and it's great. They're there. They love the kids. They hopefully make it really fun, but they don't know the game. They're not bringing the level of experience to kids to be able to really get them hooked in on the sport, quite frankly, because a kid who really wants to play this sport and really finds joy in it wants to learn it, wants to understand, how do I kick that ball further? What do I do when the ball comes in from, this angle or that angle? How do I defend? And if you've got a parent coach who knows nothing about this game and is being just given here's your introduction to coaching, we're not benefiting to the kids. And also what's happening in that environment is that if we look at who's getting access to these low income recreational programs most often, well, it's usually the low income families. Well, that means that we're telling low income families and communities, you get the leftovers, you get the secondhand stuff, you get the things that aren't actually good quality. So because I knew we weren't going to have the money to pay coaches at a level that's comparative to our sister clubs around the city, instead I focused on, do you know this game? Can you come in and bring your expertise of the game? We'll teach you the coaching aspects. We'll teach you the X's and the O's, which actually at the end of the day are way less important than, can you connect with this kid? Can you make a solid relationship with them and understand what's going on in their complex life? You're going to get a heck of a lot more out of a player when you're focused on that. So I think I'm just kind of going real deep on that, because that mindset of how do you create a club that doesn't pay coaches a ton of money, that's not asking families to pay a lot of money, and is reliant on grants and donations and all of that hard work, well, you just shift the mindset of who are the coaches that are coming in. And on top of that, we are creating an environment for coaches where they feel it's positive, it's encouraging. We have more women, we have more people of color, we have more of all of these demographics that you don't see in a lot of other clubs, because those coaches themselves feel like this is a place where I can thrive and be seen and connect with my other coaches and kids. And so all of those things combined means that we can do this thing without spending and asking for as much money, but don't hear me wrong. We need money to make this thing operate, right? We're at about a little less than a $500,000 budget. And most of that money is going towards how do we get our coaches trained up? We got to pay our staff. We do have coaches that get a stipend. We got to pay for fields. We pay for all of our uniforms. All of our kids receive free uniforms. So it takes money to run this. Like you said, Neil, in the business world and the finance world, this is no different than any other business. We need the funding to make this thing run, but we're not getting that funding from families. We need that funding from the communities. We need that funding from corporations and foundations and donors.
Good answer. So let's get in one more blocking and tackling piece, and then I have a follow-up question to even that. What are the contact hours that the kids are getting?
Like in a week?
Yeah, so how many days of practice? What does that look like? And that's important. Let me give you context. That's important because in my podcast, I often talk about you got to get into the details a little bit so that we understand, so that not you personally, but everyone, so that we can really conceptualize what's happening. So how many days a week are the kids practicing? And if there's different programming, let me know that as well.
Yeah, so everybody's 2 days a week. We all practice together. We practiced together as a club for 10 years, which is amazing. It's also just another added benefit of our culture that all the kids get to see each other, all the coaches are with each other. So everybody's getting, depending on the age, somewhere between, an hour for our youngest kids, all the way up to 2 hours for our high school age kids, twice a week. At least one game on the weekends. Some teams end up having a couple of games on a weekend. We would love to add a third day of practice for our players that are ready to take it to the next level and play at our higher competitive levels. That goes right back to our capacity. Do we have coaches that can take on another third day? Do we have a field space that we can get for another third day? Compare that to all of the other clubs that we're competing against, literally playing against on the fields. Those higher level teams are all practicing at least 3, maybe 4 times a week for their players. And so they're getting that benefit of that extra time. They've got access to the fields. They've got the coaches. So that contact hour is really, it looks different.
So how do we, and we'll put your donation link in the show notes, by the way. Guys, you'll need to support. I'm definitely going to support on behalf of Anytime Soccer Training. And I know that every dime counts. What about scaling it? How do we go to that? Because I know you have conversations, you've met with high-ranking government officials who have recognized the work you're doing. You're engaged in these conversations on a national level. One of the criticisms is going to be great, but we can't scale that.
Yeah.
So what do you say to that?
Yeah, it's been something we've actually talked about from day one. It's nearly been a topic of conversation for a decade. And I think when it comes to looking at scaling, it starts with the funding, quite frankly. If we have additional funding that comes in where I can start building out a budget that's, $750,000, $1 million, just to level set for everybody, these other pay to play clubs that we're paying against, their revenues are somewhere in the $1.5 to $2.5 million a year. So those clubs have the funding coming in where they can have high level directors. They can have people who are managing, their back of the house things, their admin, their operations, all of those things that make a business run. We need those same things to be able to scale so that we can start moving out from just we're kind of in one neighborhood, essentially right now that we're primarily serving. We'd like to go to an adjacent area of the city. We'd like to go out further east. We'd like to go further north. There are pockets of this city where this service is needed, but we can't expand into those services until we have the funding where I can have somebody else running a program in another part of the city. So when it comes to scaling it, it almost always comes back to funding, and it comes back to the infrastructure of a business and being able to say, we can scale this business with ethics, with our mission still at the center. We're not scaling just for the sake of scaling and suddenly serving 3,000 kids. It's really got to be intentional and to keep the mission center. And it takes time. And quite frankly, I've been very cognizant of growing slowly over these 10 years so that we didn't suddenly stretch ourselves thin and suddenly become the organization where now our reputation in the community is, oh yeah, PCFC, they were great 5 years ago, but then they really blew up and now they don't return our phone calls. We never hear from them. The kids aren't having as good a time. That's my worst nightmare as a founder and a leader. My best focused area is I want to make sure that the people who get served by us always feel that we have them at our center. And so when you talk about scaling, you got to take it slow.
I'm going to ask a random question, and I'm going to go back to the economics, and then we're going to pivot all the way to another part of the conversation before we wrap up.
Yeah.
It's like an interview.
I love it.
If I were to ask other clubs about PCFC in your area,
yeah,
what would they say?
They would say good things. They would say, oh, PCFC, they're great. They're helping out kids so much. They're doing great things for the community. It'd be a lot of like feel good things, which is great. I'm happy to hear those things. What you won't necessarily hear from other clubs is, oh, PCFC, they've got a hell of a team, which we do. We do have teams that are competing. We're not having teams that are competing at premier levels, but we're having teams that are doing well. What people don't necessarily see from us right away is that we are a competitive club. What people often will see most often is, oh, they're helping out. And that's great. We are helping out, but we're also about making some competitive waves.
That makes sense. That makes sense. In terms of transparency about in regards to what parents are receiving versus what they get, I have not done this podcast, but I will do this particular podcast where I say we really need to start looking at cost per soccer hour and what we're getting for that. Mm-hmm. I often say in America, one of our problems is parents are buying more soccer than their kids want or need. And I think if we looked at cost per soccer hour, that would be illuminating in terms of judging our clubs. I actually think some people may think that's intimidating, but actually it would spotlight folks who are doing a whole lot with a little. So mm-hmm. Even the notorious club rankings that everyone rags about, even unless they're number one, then all of a sudden they're important. But I'm joking a little bit, but even the club rankings, I would love to see a club ranking table, but next to it is cost per soccer hour, travel miles per game. Mm-hmm. I think this level of transparency, and mm-hmm. I know I'm in John Lennon territory, this is never going to happen, but it would be great to see, wait a minute, PCFC, they're here, not necessarily rankings, but still, but its cost per soccer hour is mm-hmm. here. Travel per game is this, mm-hmm. and I'm getting this value. This is where I would love youth soccer to go. And if I was the czar of U.S. soccer, and I'm going to put my Obama hat on, then I would want all of the youth soccer clubs to have to publish these basic stats. How much am I going to be expected to travel per game? Mm-hmm. Period. Mm-hmm. How much am I going to play? How much am I expected to pay per soccer hour? I think those two stats can really force the conversation around and arm our consumers, our parents, with the ammunition to say, does this make sense? And challenge the outliers. And then we go back to our clubs and say, you know what? If you want to bring your cost per soccer hour down, what do you got to do? You got to offer more services for less. So you mm-hmm. may have the same base rate, but maybe you have to offer some free play. That's going to bring it down. Mm-hmm. I always say, I wish they had a badge. We're free play neutral, meaning for every hour of training we do an hour of free play. Again, we're in John Lennon. That ain't going to happen. But I would love a free play neutral club. But what do you say about that? That transparency, is there any way we can get there? Are you guys having this conversation already?
I love it. I just wrote those things down on my sticky note right here because I agree with you. Those two stats, cost per soccer hour and what's the travel that's involved, if those two things were shown on a transparent level for all clubs, including us, I'd love to show that, right? I'd love to have that comparison. That I think that gives parents such an important piece of information that shows the real state of play for that club. And really allows them to make a decision about, what are we really investing in? Because when I hear from friends of mine who have parents in big pay-to-play clubs, their first comment to me always is, oh, I'm driving all over the city. I got to go over to the west side to get to practice. I got to go out to this city now to do a game. It takes up everything. It takes up all of our weekend. All of these resources that are being used. And so I think to be able to have just a really transparent look at that would be brilliant. And you keep saying, I don't know if this will be done, but I am here to say that, one, I am a doer. I don't see anything that can't be done. And two, this goes right in line with the Liberate Sports campaign that we're launching. We've been soft launching it this year. We're launching it officially next year in March. And it is about erasing the gap between privilege and play. That's its biggest mission. And it's using it's our campaign that we're launching, and it's using our 10 years of experience of looking at all of these micro level symptoms of systemic racism, oppression, misogyny, all of these things that we've been addressing, and taking it to this larger national and global concept. And part of what we're working on next year is really just about awareness. Just bringing awareness to the issue of pay to play, specifically in soccer. And I think these two data points right here, Neil, are actually what I'm going to start focusing on and see if I can get some information about these two things, because this is going to be the stats that people are going to need to see to really understand this issue. It is very complex, and it's part of the reason why we created this campaign, to bring it to this larger mission of erasing the gap between privilege and play, because that's somebody people can conceptualize, right? Oh, yes, I can understand. There's privilege that involves in being able to access, and we don't want that to be that way anymore. But what does that really mean? Well, it's cost per soccer hour. What does that actually break down to? It's brilliant. I'm going with it, Neil. I'm running with it.
Hey, thank you. When you're giving your Nobel Peace Prize speech, just give me a shout out. I do think you can come up with some simple stats that anyone can understand.
Yeah.
That can stimulate the conversation and motivate people to change behaviors.
Yeah.
So we're going to end with this: community. Everybody likes saying community until you really start saying, when we say community, we talking about everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a tendency in sports to characterize it as somewhat as an outlet, something where I don't have to think about the real issues that affect our everyday lives. I don't want to think about poverty. I don't want to think about racism. I don't want to think about sexism. I don't want to think about the LGBTQ community. I don't want to think about special needs or physical disabilities. I don't want to think about mental health. Sport is the place where we can all just have fun and let the ills of the world just roll off of us. Don't talk about it. We're all a team. The only thing that matters is the guys in the locker room. When we know that's not the case. So how much backlash, how much support, how would you characterize your mission to be inclusive of the entire community, and not as a footnote in a newsletter, but as a critical component of what you guys do? This taught me back to day one, when someone probably tried to talk you out of it, to a decade later. How would you characterize that experience?
Yeah, I definitely tried. I was tried to gotten talked out of it several times. I'd say in those early days when I would bring this concept of, we're going to make this an inclusive club for all kinds of identities and all kinds of people, and we're going to make it low cost or no cost, the feedback I got was, why don't you just go join a bigger club? Why don't you just go make that program as a footnote, basically, of a bigger club? And I would say, no, that's not solving any problems. That's not dealing with any sort of system issues whatsoever. That's just tagging on to something that already exists. And so all along all these years, I've gotten all sorts of pushback of, you can't serve everybody. You have to be focused on one identity. You've got to be focused on one community. My response has always been, if we create an environment of play and competition where we're focused on inclusiveness being the core and safety being the core, and that it's not an afterthought, and you're creating safety and inclusion for some of our most vulnerable kids, our kids living in poverty, who are also dealing with systemic racism, who are also dealing with potentially homophobia or transphobia. If you think about the multi-layers of oppression, and you center the sort of global experience of somebody who might experience all of those layers at the same time, and you think about what are all of the barriers that could exist for that one person, and you make the space safe for them, you're automatically creating a space that's safe and inclusive and welcoming to so many people. And that's how we've addressed it. And so me being a trans person, thinking about the gender of the binary that exists within sports. Well, we don't have any gender segregated teams. Kids come into our club. How old are you? What level of play are you? How far do you want to go in this game? There's your team. Girl, boy, non-binary, trans person. That is not the most important aspect, but the most important aspect is, what kind of athlete are you, and how far do you want to go? So just that's one example of the many, many things that we do within the club to say this isn't an inclusive place for just one kind of person. It's for everybody. And when you actually are successful in doing that, which I think we've been really successful in doing, then we get people from so many communities interacting with each other, learning from one another, understanding there's so many more commonalities that we have than differences. And now those myths and those stereotypes and all of those assumptions that are so ingrained in our society around race and gender and economics, they start to dissolve. And that's what it means to create a space and an inclusive, truly inclusive, radically inclusive, which is what I like to say. But it takes time, and it takes relationships, and it takes putting the ego down, and it takes putting away the ideals of, we're going to go and win the championship. No, we're going to actually create this fertile ground so that when our icing on the cake is winning some championship, then we can really celebrate.
Thank you. So 2 more things. Give me an example, real life example, story of a player or a family who embodies the work that you guys are doing.
Oh, you want me to give you one story? Okay, I'll give you the one that's kind of most recent, that I think touches on a lot of these things. A family just came to us in the summer, this summertime. They've been here in the United States from Venezuela for just a few months. We learned pretty quickly that they were living in a really unsafe shelter. They have a 18-month-old and an 8-year-old. The 8-year-old's playing with us. We quickly found another place for them to live just through sourcing of networks. We then helped them get furniture, food, clothing, basically everything that they needed. Some of that was donated. Some of that was actually things that we purchased. Our bilingual family services manager helped connect them with the other resources they needed for documentation, getting a job, all the things, right? Just the myriad of things that happen when you're in a new country. We did all of that in 72 hours with a staff of 3. Yeah, with a very small staff of 3, primarily our family services manager doing the bulk of that work. What I then learned later, as we got to know the family more, is that they have a transgender family member, and I've been able to just be sort of a informal support system to that family, and to just let them know that, hey, I'm also a trans person, and I'm doing okay, and it's going to be okay. All of those touch points, that's what we do. That embodies PCFC right there. That child who's 8 years old, who's come over from another country and is in a totally new environment and is dealing with a whole lot of things at home, gets to come and have fun and play and get all of that anxiety and all that stress out. And also the family's getting a huge support system, not only from those logistical things that we're doing, but they get to come and have fun and be at our potlucks and be at our barbecues and come to our big World Cup watch party that we did. It's so much more than just kicking a ball around that we do. It's really a deeper level, and we're doing something absolutely radically inclusive.
Kaig Lightner, PCFC founder, social activist, soccer coach, club director. You don't have enough heads for all these hats. It's been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I could go on for much longer. I got so many questions. So this is what we tend to do, though. We can't capture all this stuff in a single interview. Just can't. So there's a standing invitation to jump back on at any time to let us know what you guys got going on. And then we post this into our various Facebook groups, and we encourage people, especially in the area, to reach out to you guys directly to offer networking, services, a handshake, obviously make a donation, all the above. So we're going to put it in our Facebook groups, and we're going to start the conversation there, because this is important work that needs to be done. People talk about it, but I always say, you're like Home Depot. You're the home of the doers. You're actually trying to do something. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, oh, I don't want to talk. I'm in the home of the doers. So with that being said, my name is Neil Crawford. I'm the founder of Anytime Soccer Training, and I'm also the host of the Inside Scoop. I have sat down and had a very inspiring conversation with Kaig Lightner, who is the founder of PCFC Portland. Let me get this right. Portland Community Football Club. All of his information is going to be in the show notes, and you can make a donation directly into the show notes to support these guys. You guys know we're heading into the Christmas season. They really need your support. Thanks for watching, and let's get better together. Thanks, Kaig.
Thanks, Neil.